April 14, 2019. A chilly Sunday evening. The clock read 6:42 p.m. as the traffic lights blinked red and green in the heart of a small town outside St. Louis. The streets were alive with the usual rush, cars honking, people eager to get home, the sound of tires rolling across the asphalt. But then, everything slowed. In the middle of the crosswalk stood a man. Black, mid-50s, leaning on crutches, his left leg stiff as he tried to push himself forward. Each step looked painful, like he was carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. The traffic countdown above his head ticked down from 10, 9, 8. Drivers gripped their steering wheels, waiting. Some rolled their eyes. Others muttered under their breath. On the sidewalk, a few people stood frozen, watching, whispering, but not one of them moved to help. The man's eyes flicked nervously at the traffic light. His hands trembled on the crutches. He knew he wasn't going to make it across before the light changed. And when that happened, the flood of cars would be on him. It should have been a simple moment, a man crossing a street. But instead, it turned into something no one there would ever forget. Because while the world stood back, someone unexpected decided to step forward. The light flashed green for the cars waiting at the intersection. Engines revved, impatient hands tapped steering wheels, yet the man was still in the crosswalk. His crutches wobbled as he tried to hurry, but his left leg dragged behind, stiff and uncooperative. Sweat gathered on his forehead even though the air was cool. His chest heaved, every movement looking like a battle he was losing. From the sidewalk, people noticed but did nothing. A woman with a shopping bag clutched her phone tighter, turning her head away. A young couple whispered, glancing at him but refusing to step in. A man in a suit smirked, shaking his head as if the scene was nothing more than an inconvenience. Some drivers leaned on their horns, sharp blasts cutting through the street, as if the sound alone would push him forward. The man's crutch slipped slightly, scraping against the asphalt. For a split second, his balance teetered, and his body lurched forward. Gasps escaped from a few onlookers, but still, no one moved. His eyes darted left and right, and his lips pressed into a tight line. The humiliation was visible. Not just the pain of his body, but the sting of being watched and mocked as if he were a burden. The countdown clock above the crosswalk reset, glowing red again, signaling for cars to move. The traffic shifted, creeping toward him, lights bouncing off hoods and windshields. The man gritted his teeth and braced himself, gripping his crutches tighter. He wasn't asking for help, but he desperately needed it. This was the moment where most would keep walking, pretend not to see, or tell themselves it wasn't their problem. But in that sea of indifference, one man finally decided that enough was enough. From the opposite side of the street, a man in his early 30s watched the struggle unfold. His name was Ethan, tall with a worn denim jacket, short brown hair, and a steady look in his eyes. Unlike the others, he didn't turn away. He dropped the cup of coffee he had been holding onto the nearest trash can without a second thought and stepped off the curb. The sound of car horns grew louder as Ethan raised one hand, signaling for the approaching vehicles to stop. Drivers stared, some shaking their heads, but Ethan didn't flinch. He moved with urgency, his boots striking the pavement as he closed the gap between himself and the man in the crosswalk. The man with crutches glanced up, startled. His lips parted as if to protest, but Ethan was already there, reaching out an arm without hesitation. "I got you," Ethan said, his voice firm but calm, cutting through the noise around them. With his free hand, Ethan steadied the man's elbow, guiding his step, easing the weight off the shaking crutch. The man's breathing slowed just enough to follow Ethan's lead. The two moved together, carefully, step by step, the crowd on both sidewalks now watching in silence. A teenage boy lowered his phone, no longer recording. The woman with the shopping bag shifted uncomfortably. The man in the suit who smirked earlier turned away. Each of them saw what Ethan was doing and realized it was what they should have done from the beginning. The red hand above the crosswalk continued flashing, warning that time had run out. Yet the cars remained still, drivers watching as Ethan held his ground, walking steadily beside the man until they reached the safety of the curb. When they finally made it, the man's shoulders sagged, a mixture of relief and exhaustion washing over him. His eyes met Ethan's, a silent gratitude written there that words couldn't capture. Ethan didn't smile, didn't expect thanks. He simply nodded once, as if to say you weren't alone out there. As the man steadied himself on the curb, the silence around them broke. A voice from the crowd called out, sharp and mocking. "Took you long enough. What's the point of going out if you can't even walk?" A few others chuckled, their laughter carrying across the street. The man with the crutches lowered his head, his jaw tightening, every cruel word sinking deep. Ethan turned, his eyes locking on the group responsible. 3 young men, all in their 20s, stood near a parked car. One leaned against the hood with his arms folded, smirking like he was waiting for an audience. Another nudged his friend, whispering something that made them both laugh again. Ethan didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Is this funny to you?" he asked, his tone even, steady, carrying across the space. The smirk faltered for a moment, but then one of them shrugged. "We're just saying what everyone's thinking. He's holding up traffic." The man with the crutches shifted uncomfortably, as if to retreat, but Ethan stepped slightly in front of him, not blocking him, but making it clear he wasn't alone. "He's not holding up traffic," Ethan said, his gaze fixed on the young men. "He's crossing the street. Same as you, same as me. Difference is, he's got more strength than any of you standing there laughing." The crowd fell quiet again. A woman holding her toddler glanced at Ethan with wide eyes, her expression softening. A man who had earlier shaken his head now looked down, ashamed. The laughter had stopped completely, replaced by a stillness that felt heavier than the noise before. The man leaning on the car shifted, the smugness slipping from his face. He muttered something under his breath, then looked away. One by one, the others followed his lead, avoiding Ethan's stare. The crowd didn't clap, didn't cheer, but the silence told its own story. Shame was settling where mockery had been. Ethan didn't linger on them. He turned back to the man he had helped, speaking low enough for only him to hear. "Don't listen to them. You made it across. That's what matters." The man swallowed hard, his eyes glassy but steady, as if Ethan's words were the anchor he needed in that moment. For a moment, the street felt suspended in time. Cars waited at the light, engines humming, yet no one seemed in a rush anymore. Eyes that had once carried judgment now carried something else, unease, maybe even guilt. A young mother who had been clutching her stroller leaned forward slightly, whispering to her child, as if trying to explain the weight of what just happened. An older man near the crosswalk took off his baseball cap, holding it in his hands, staring down at the pavement. Ethan adjusted his stance, still close enough to the man with the crutches that he could feel his uneasiness. The man's breathing was shallow, his shoulders tense, but he didn't turn back. Step by step, he moved toward the other side of the street, his crutches clicking against the asphalt. Each step was slow but deliberate, the kind of movement that demanded attention. Not because it was flawless, but because it was hard. The crowd followed with their eyes. A teenage boy, who had been smirking moments earlier, shifted uncomfortably, as if realizing he had witnessed something that would stay with him. A woman near the corner dug into her purse, pulled out a water bottle, and held it loosely, as if she might offer it when they reached the sidewalk. The mood had shifted, mockery had turned into reflection, and reflection into respect. Ethan's presence seemed to anchor the space. He didn't lecture, he didn't wave his arms, he simply walked alongside, every step steady, showing the man with the crutches that his dignity remained untouched. That simple act spoke louder than the taunts ever had. When they reached the far curb, the man paused, leaning into his crutches, catching his breath. Ethan kept his gaze forward, giving him the moment without pressing. Across the street, the once loud onlookers now looked like students in an unspoken lesson, the kind no classroom could ever teach. It wasn't applause that filled the air, but a silence weighted with meaning, one that told everyone watching that something had shifted inside them. Ethan hadn't just helped a man cross the road. He had forced strangers to see, really see, the man's humanity, and their own in the process. On the far side of the street, the man steadied himself, both hands pressed against the grips of his crutches, his chest rising and falling with measured breaths. The effort had taken something out of him, but what lingered on his face wasn't defeat, it was a quiet pride. He turned slightly toward Ethan, his eyes glassy but firm, as if trying to find the right words without letting emotion spill over. For a beat, nothing was said. The noise of the city swelled back in, the thrum of cars, a bus pulling away from the curb, footsteps of people moving on. But in that circle of space around them, the stillness remained. The onlookers, who just minutes before had filled the air with careless laughter, now shifted uneasily. A man in a suit, clutching his phone, lowered it and slid it into his pocket. A young woman who had been recording the scene on her device looked down, her thumb hesitating over the screen, before slowly pressing the button to stop. No one dared to break the silence. It was as though the street itself demanded they hold back and absorb what had just unfolded. Ethan finally turned to the man with the crutches, not speaking, only offering a small nod, one that carried a message without needing words. You did this. You belong here. You are not alone. That nod was enough to make the man's lips tremble into a faint smile, the kind born from relief, not joy. He lifted his chin slightly, reclaiming something he had nearly lost in the middle of that street, his dignity in front of strangers. Then, softly, the man whispered, just loud enough for Ethan to hear, "Thank you." 2 words, almost carried away by the sound of traffic, but words that landed with weight. Ethan didn't respond aloud. He simply rested his hand gently on the man's shoulder for a moment, then let it fall, giving him back the space to stand tall on his own. Around them, the crowd no longer looked the same. Some eyes were lowered in shame, others locked on Ethan as if trying to understand what it meant to step forward when no one else would. And though no one spoke, something had been planted in each of them. A discomfort, yes, but also a lesson they would carry long after this ordinary intersection returned to its usual rhythm. As the man with the crutches adjusted himself on the sidewalk, the traffic light changed again, and cars began rolling past as though nothing remarkable had happened. Yet for everyone who had stood witness, the world did not feel the same. Some walked away quickly, their footsteps heavy with guilt, their faces turned down to avoid eye contact. Others lingered a little longer, their silence an admission that what they had seen had struck deeper than they were ready to confess. The man lifted his gaze to Ethan once more, his voice steady now, and said, "You didn't just help me cross the street. You reminded me, I still matter." His words were simple, but they carried the weight of years spent being overlooked. Ethan met his eyes and gave a quiet nod, not seeking recognition, not seeking thanks, just offering acknowledgement to a man who deserved to be seen. The 2 men stood there for only a moment longer before Ethan stepped back, letting him have the spotlight he had been denied for far too long. The man gripped his crutches, straightened his back, and took another small step forward on his own. The crowd had no choice but to notice him now, not for his struggle, but for his strength. Later, as the story of what happened spread beyond that busy intersection, through whispers, retellings, and the memory of those who had watched, it carried a reminder that lingers even now. Courage doesn't always look like grand gestures. Sometimes, it's the act of one person refusing to stay silent, of one hand reaching out when every other hand stays tucked away. On that evening of April 14, 2019, 2 strangers met at the corner of East Main Street and Willow Avenue. One found dignity again. The other reminded the world what it means to be human. And for everyone else who was there, the question would remain: when the next moment comes, will you step forward, or will you look away?